Hi, everyone, and welcome to Around the Product Development, our weekly show where we, in 25 minutes, feature lively discussions on hot topic all about digital product creation. We're talking topics from monetization to innovation, and we cover it all in just 25 minutes. No fluff, just actionable insights from digital product practitioners who are also part, most of the time, of the Agile Product Builders community. And about this community, it is a Slack community powered by Boldare, who are digital product creators and consultants. And this week, for the very first time, we have two guests instead of one, actually, which is unique for us. And we have Siobhan and Matt Pollitt, who are the co-founders of 2+More, and they're in the business of creating nearshore development partnerships that combine technical expertise with UK-based product and design leadership. A whole mouthful, very complex. I'm going to give them the word in a second, actually, to explain a bit more about that. But today we're going to talk about nearshore software outsourcing and the top 5 challenges and solutions around this. So, Matt, Siobhan, very nice to have you here. Welcome. How have you been doing? And maybe you can quickly start introducing yourself as well, because I had a very generic description of who you are and what you do, but I'm very curious to hear from you as well.
No, hi Matt, by the way. I think it's good to stay with generic, because otherwise we'll spend 25 minutes telling you our whole backstories and where we come from. But you kind of hit the nail on the head. We set up a business that facilitates nearshore partnerships in the UK. But I guess what makes us slightly unique is that we have design and product resource in the UK. So I think it's the main subject we're going to be talking about today, is like how to deal with the kind of the cultural differences and scaling remote teams and some of the issues that are there. And we kind of work as a business to help kind of facilitate that, stop a lot of those issues happening in the first place, and basically make sure that we get to better product faster, more efficiently, and build better relationships.
Yeah, summarized very well.
There we go.
Yeah,
that sounded better than I thought it would, actually.
Sounded good. Just a very brief question to follow up. How did you start this business, or what was the reason behind it? I can imagine you two started it some time ago. What was the reasoning behind it? Did you feel there was a need for it? Did you feel in your other job was there something that triggered it actually to start this business?
Lots. So we kept identifying the same gap in the market time and time again. And we worked together under different guises, approaching projects together. So I had experience in managing nearshore development teams. Matt very much comes from a product support and design background. And what we felt we kept trying to do was put a square peg in a round hole. And rather than kind of forcing a fit that didn't work, we came together to kind of create our vision by, once we've identified this kind of gap in the market, which essentially was lots of businesses provide introductory services. So they introduce UK clients to nearshore development teams, nearshore development houses. They sometimes also offer design services through those nearshore development partners. But we identified problems in those collaborations, problems that could be easily overcome, but actually quite often were missed because people are so focused on their day job. So heads down doing their day job, and then communication and cultural differences arise, and problems that should just be small challenges became bigger issues, and what could have been really fruitful collaborations sometimes fall apart for simple reasons. That essentially, if the processes were managed more effectively, the collaborations work much more smoothly. So rather than just providing these introductory services, we wanted to manage those collaborations more effectively and also provide onshore design services and leadership, really. So it's a different approach.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I think sounds very logical and very reasonable as well. So maybe to just get to the topic, we're talking about nearshore software outsourcing, right? Maybe just for the audience who doesn't understand, right? I'm sure that many people know it. What are we talking about actually when we talk about nearshore software development? Maybe you can give like a short explanation. I've got in like 2 sentences.
So interestingly, we've just traveled around 3 different countries in Europe. And if you ask any of those people in those 3 different countries, as well as the UK, what nearshoring is, they all have different answers. And I think that's one of the big issues, right? With outsourcing, nearshoring, they can be loaded words in the terminology that sit with them. What we're basically saying, and when we talk about nearshore or outsourcing, is actually helping to build teams, and teams need to be integrated to build good products. So really, what we're talking about is the ability to completely bring in a team to build a product from zero to something, or with bigger companies to bring in teams or extra resources or people that specialize in specific technologies to augment existing teams. So really to help them give more capacity, help them more scalable, and help them deliver better, faster.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
That nearshore being kind of, we look at time zone differences. So when we say, there can be far shore as well, and then offshore is kind of collaborative interpretation of that. So usually outside of your own country, it's the very obvious meaning of that word. But like Matt says, there can be negative connotations with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's good to understand, right? Many people have like mixed ideas about it, or sometimes don't understand near shore or far shore, right? It's quite something to understand in the end. And I think people mix it as well. So it's good to kind of have like a baseline on what you're talking about or not. And maybe just to continue, Matt, you just mentioned like we talked about a team, right? Or being a team actually. So what are the challenges with client suppliers, for example, when you want to create a team or have like this team kind of approach? So what are the challenges and how do you solve it around that, for example?
So it's really interesting. Like I've been building digital products probably for about 15 years now, and been really fortunate. I've got to work on some really kind of big things inside big companies. Whenever I see this fall apart, it always normally comes down to communication. Sometimes it can be cultural differences. Sometimes it can be not having a good fit, but a lot of the time, the root of all this is kind of communication. 10 years ago, I worked on some 7 years, 8 years, something like that. Anyway, we were working on banking software, and we were providing design consultancy to the bank, working on an iPad application for one of the national banks in the UK. All the development team was outsourced, and it was offshore. And what we found a lot was designs would go over, something different would come back. The nuance in like the product, the really special part of an experience that makes it delightful would often be missing, and it would be about deliverable. Things would be overpromised and then kind of under-delivered. And that's what we found a lot. And I think that's the thing that we talked about a huge amount, isn't it? Really, 99 out of 100 times, if one of these relationships hasn't worked out, it's down to the proper level of communication, expectation setting and managing, and being able to actually try and, everyone says one team, right? But it's really hard to do. It's really hard to have a supplier-buyer relationship within a team and then not have the way it can kind of work. And where we found that does work really well is actually by having this level of communication that sits in between, but also this kind of closeness in the way they work. So like not, hey, here's a bit of work, disappear for 3 or 4 weeks, come back with it and pull the blanket off it and go, ta-da! And everyone's normally upset. But to, really kind of bring in agile practices, make sure that you're having ceremonies like constantly, and also that you have, and this is partly why we exist, but that you can have somebody that acts as a buffer in between the team and the stakeholders, managing that situation from both sides, because sometimes the team won't want to say anything, right? And sometimes the buyer won't say anything until it's all gone wrong, and then it goes from being everything's amazing to everything's terrible, like in a heartbeat. And that's where we feel that it kind of works. And that's where you work really close.
Yeah, that was my question. How do you get people to be that honest as well at some point, maybe, or let their guard down a little bit, right? Is it just about communicating, or is there like more about it?
Yeah, I think you need to be very careful not to make assumptions. That can be, it sounds so simplistic, but that can be a big falling down point for a lot of people. So, and again, that can come down to cultural differences. So being very blunt about what you want, setting expectations, making sure that when you select a supplier, you've got those same cultural alignments. So what you want to try and do is, businesses work really, really hard to create a company culture, and you want to try and find a partner that has reflects those same cultural aspirations that you do for your own business. And then just get everybody in alignment, everybody working towards the same goal, understanding it's about shared success and working really hard to have that, one team approach. So really stringent account management processes in place, making sure from the very outset that you've got agreement about communication tools, about account management processes, about expectations. This is the way we work. Standardize those processes. Try and create a true one team dynamic. And then, I think what's really important, if you don't have a company like us involved, you manage a lot of that because, I often joke that my business or my side of the business is a bit like being a marriage counsellor. So I go in and say, I'm not in client, so you can tell me everything. And, that's to our engineering teams. So if there are issues internally, tell me it all. Let me help solve that dynamically. And honestly and openly. And then likewise to our clients, we say the same thing. Obviously, if you don't have a company like us managing that process, then it's about putting those really stringent account management processes in place from the very beginning and setting a standard of expectations. So this is how we're going to work. This is what we expect. Let's be really honest and frank with each other, and hope for the best.
Yeah. If you allow me to stay in that marriage metaphor for a second, right, or the counselor metaphor, I can assume as well working together with another team is also a bit like a marriage, right? So you have to get to know each other, like a relationship. Maybe that's better, right, than a marriage right away. But like when we talk about nearshore, offshore, farshore, whatever, we also talk sometimes about cultural differences, like you mentioned before. But there's also the aspect of time differences, right, or different time zones. How do you manage around those, for example? That I can imagine, like. Same with a relationship, right? It's hard enough already when you're close to each other, but it gets a lot more complicated when you have like a time difference to that.
Yeah, I think you can manage that to your advantage though. So, being, if you're a UK client, we quite often find that with our development partners, say in Europe, having 1 or 2 hours time difference where they're ahead of client teams is an advantage. So your development team is already working a couple of hours in advance. So manage those time zones to benefit you. So make sure by the end of your working day, the team know exactly what's expected of them the following day, or you have a plan in place. And by the time our UK teams wake up, their engineering teams are 1 or 2 hours ahead of the day. And then it's, scheduling meetings to make sure that you have overlapping times, so you're not expecting people to work too much outside of their normal working day. Or if that has to happen for project deadlines or certain situations, then that is recognised and the working days change slightly for whoever that impacts. So you're not expecting people to end up working a 14-hour day because they're trying to work in the time zone of their country that they're living and the country that they're servicing. So it's being really aware and managing it to your benefit, I think.
I think it's a really interesting subject because I think everyone talks about the negative parts of time zone. So I've done the extreme. Like I've had a contract where I worked with an Australian company, and obviously that's about a bigger time zone difference as you can get. So and it's hard, right? The communication's hard. It's hard to get that kind of gel of being together. And I think one of the reasons why nearshore works better is because you only have that smaller gap. But I'd say one of the advantages of that, especially for team members that really, team members are different, right? Designers, developers, different, but kind of the same. You get some that are really outgoing, want to sit in a meeting, they want to engage, they want to talk. And you get some that really just want to sit quietly in a room, have their heads down and work. And one of the advantages of the time zone difference is actually it does give those people a few hours a day where they can have that kind of dedicated work, especially if you're working in an organization that likes lots of meetings or has lots of ceremonies. So I think there are kind of advantages. I'd say the biggest part though still, and this is one that you're a massive, you really promote a lot, is actually getting together in person at times during the year. So even though you're remote, I think it's always really important for people to meet face to face. Like, there's only so much that can happen when you're kind of talking through one of these screens. And, I wave my hands around in a certain way, but it's not the same as being in the room. And we have to communicate directly. And I think in longer projects, which might be like multi-year delivery cycles, having those teams get together and make a personal relationship is so important, because that carries then across the remote side much better. So we're a massive fan of like kicking off projects, bringing people sure to do that. There's a cost involved, but we really feel that with what you're potentially saving with the nearshore model, actually it's a really good investment, because it just gets you going on the right foot.
And actually, post-pandemic, we've seen another change in that many companies are now predominantly having a remote workforce. And you could be a UK-based organisation, but your employees are in fact all over the UK. They could be in Ireland, Scotland. And now, where back pre-pandemic, you'd be trying to convince people that a remote working model or hybrid could be effective. Now everybody has bought into that. And actually, a lot of people are either downsizing their offices, companies are downsizing their offices, getting rid of office space entirely and using shared office space. And what is another advantage that we're seeing more and more is that our development partners have these amazing office spaces. And an advantage is bring your teams over, your internal teams over to the development houses, make use of their spaces. You know, these are bright, modern environments where teams can work together, engage, and it's just a much nicer working environment. And there's you know, an actual physical office that you can use. So that becomes a benefit, as opposed to prior pandemic, when everybody had their own office space and they didn't see that in the same light.
I heard you say a couple of things that are interesting to me. Like Matt talked about projects, right? Sometimes multi-year projects, very long, right? We talked about time differences and also a bit about remote work, right? So how do you retain talent during all of these things, maybe like changes as well, right? So I can imagine, especially if a project takes a long time, how do you retain talent? If you're located in many different areas, right? Maybe physically, how do you retain or find talent even? So how does that work actually? I can imagine there must be challenges around it, but maybe also it might have been a bit easier now, right? Since everyone is working from home or from the location anyway. How does that look for you?
It's really interesting, a really, really interesting question. I think we've kind of gone through different cycles where, you know, pre-pandemic, it was all about having a fun office with a ping pong table that nobody used, and, you know, a kitchen that was always empty, and lots of other kind of perks that were there. I think fundamentally now, I mean, look, I think you can try and overcomplicate this kind of stuff, and we can all use lots of clever business words and things like that. But fundamentally, humans like to work with other humans where they feel valued and they feel that they're doing good work. I think if you put the kind of structures in place and create an environment where people feel that they are bringing value, they're listened to, they can do the best work of their lives, that fundamentally for me is how you retain talent. I think some of the best places I've worked haven't necessarily been the places that pay the best, but they've been the places where I felt that the projects I've worked on like have touched hundreds of millions of people around the world, or, you know, like I'm proud to kind of show the work I've done. And I think the kind of stuff that Siobhan was talking about, building that culture internally, is so important. And you mentioned right at the beginning that finding partners that have the same cultural alignment as you is really important. If you're a big bank in the UK and you don't have a culture of creativity and kind of spontaneity and free flowing kind of development work, and you hire a really creative, like small partner, that might not be the right fit for you. You know, the partner's going to find it hard to integrate with like the corporate side of stuff, and that's the kind of relationship that might fall down. If you can find those companies that align with your set of values, the type of business that you are, the way that you treat your staff, that carries across. It's one of the reasons why we only ever work with partners where we go out and visit them, because you can say a lot of things online and you can put lots of stock pictures up and you can put lots of things, but actually getting into the office and understanding and seeing how people are interacting with each other and working with each other is normally the good litmus test of how those partnerships work. I think perks, money, all that stuff falls aside. Like, people really engaged, really good people, the kind of people that you want to retain, want to be working on good things, and they want to be working in an environment where they feel like it's more than work. They'd be doing it even if they weren't getting paid for it.
Yeah, and I think engineering houses have got an advantage because they can offer a really wide scope of projects to their teams. They can also allow their staff to work in a really supportive way to each other, right? So, and they can bring fresh eyes. So you could be part of an engineering house, you could be working on a project, you could get blocked, you could get challenged, and you've got a whole set of other people working across different projects that you can speak to, that you can lean on for support, that can give you insights, help unblock you in certain ways. That if you were solely just working on one product within one company, you don't get that kind of shared resource and support. And also, so in terms of, exactly kind of expanding on what Matt said, career growth, I think people want opportunities to work across different projects, work with different people, and engineering houses have to invest in staying ahead of technology curves. So quite a lot of them have their own academies, their own training. The cost for a UK company to train and retain top talent, in the UK, we see it all the time. It's people, contractors and consultants. The top engineers are often contractors and consultants chasing the pound note, chasing the top money, working with pounds, working with banks who have a lot of pounds, and all the pounds. Kind of the fintech industry, the city. That's where
the money is.
Where the money is, and actually, what people want is to retain. To work with resources where that knowledge is retained. So, you work with an engineering company who invest in retention, you can often work with those same resources for years. Even when they leave your project, they stay within that engineering house, so they can help onboard new people, and it works really seamlessly. It would take a lot to convince me that it's better to have a huge internal engineering team and not to have the scalability and flexibility that comes with a partnership.
And then a short question before we go to the last topic. So we talk about retaining people, right? Retaining talent and having them. So how do you make sure they're onboarded as well? Maybe that's an important topic as well, I can imagine, right? Because you want them to be fast to get started with a project. Are there any best practices or lessons on that learned?
Yeah, so again, it comes back to really stringent account management processes. Quite often when we work with our partners, we put in buddying systems, like shadowing systems. So when you onboard somebody, they have a partnership with somebody who's been in the team for a while. And that could be client side or within the engineering team within the development house. And they shadow or buddy them for a certain amount of time until they become very comfortable with that project. It's also the early phases, lots of feedback, so having that continuous feedback loop, making sure that they know what they're doing, that they're comfortable. If there's any issues, so issues only become issues if they're left to fester for too long. So it's open lines of communication, putting decent tools and account management processes in place to kind of mitigate problems before they become a big problem.
Yeah. And maybe the last topic, which is really interesting to me, we talked earlier about projects, right? And Matt mentioned like multi-year projects as well. And I can imagine that the demand changes in these multi-year projects. I'm coming back to it all the time, but I can imagine the relationship might change as well, right? But also the demand might change. The project might become smaller, might get a lot bigger, it might scale, right? Or it might downscale as well, which is also something that happens. So how do you deal with that if a customer needs less people, more people, if they scale, if there's flexibility involved? Like, what are the main challenges around that topic, actually?
So I think actually that's one of the main advantages, right, of working with Nearshore. Yeah. If you build a UK team and you build, let's say you did that 7 years ago and you wanted to build a mobile app and you built out an iOS team and all the support that sits there for that, I guarantee you the next problem that comes along, you're going to try and fix it with a iOS shaped hole, right? Yeah. The whole advantage that we talk about when we bring teams into the UK is we say, well, look, you can have some core senior people in the UK from maybe like an architecture point of view or design. But by bringing in these partners and working with multiple partners, sometimes you can actually change the technology and the approach truly agnostically. And those teams can scale up and scale down dynamically. And I think, sometimes that's the way it's set up commercially. There'd be like a minimum retained level of resource, and then there's a flex that sits above and beyond that. That can be a kind of a nice way to do it. And then again, by having the ability to do that within these companies, is that people, I personally feel there's nothing worse than when you're sat on a project where you're billing time and materials and you know that there's not enough work to do, right? So I think that can be like one of the things that disengages talent as well, that if they feel that they're not actually delivering value.
Exactly.
And then other people on the other side start to realize it and everyone starts to get quite awkward about it and it falls down. So I think being realistic and being able to build those scalable elements into contracts is actually the way to kind of do it. And it works really nicely. It can mean some people can come off for a break and work on another project and then come back if the demand ramps up. It tends to be you've got more people up front, maybe a little bit less in discovery, but at least at the initial kind of kick off and starting to work on main sprints. And then that can be like ramped up and ramped down, depending on, other commercial factors and the scale of the problems.
Yeah, we see that in different projects with different types of resources. You quite often don't need a designer's time the same time throughout the life cycle of the project. That's quite often the same for QA and testing. So, where often in the, if you had these full-time teams internally, you'd have to have FTEs. And like Matt said, they're not being utilised fully. You don't need to do that. You can put in arrangements with your partners that actually we need design resource. We need 80% of them for the first month of the project, and then we can scale right back. And that flexibility is invaluable for both sides and for the person working on the projects as well.
Also very efficient.
Yeah,
efficiencies.
Did we answer your?
I think you. Yeah, I think you did actually. I think it sounds very, very reasonable to me, so that's fine. And I think we also are through our time already, so we have to end it here. I have one more question for you that you maybe can answer in 10 or 20 seconds. Where do people find you? Can they contact you via LinkedIn directly? Do you have an email address they can send a message to?
You'll be able to get hold of this. But obviously email as well. We can send emails over to you to put into the notes and links and things like that. But yeah.
All right. Great. LinkedIn is also a way. So thank you so much. Our time is over. Unfortunately, it goes really quick always. And it was very interesting. You had very nice answers to my questions, actually, which helped me a lot to understand this world a lot better. And I think the audience as well. So thank you again for joining, Siobhan and Matt. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And then for the audience, I'd like to invite you to our event next week again. Same time, same location. So 3 p.m. CET. And we're going to talk about testing ideas for corporate innovation. Slow, steady, disruptive. Also very interesting topic. So Siobhan, Matt, thank you one more time. For the audience, feel free to send Matt or Siobhan a question, LinkedIn, email, or through their website. And see you all next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.